Hi, my name is Danielle Reed, and my presentation today is about federal spending on education.
And we are the audience members, Bob, Sue, Carly, and Suki.
Okay. So, according to the article School Funding from the Opposing Viewpoints online collection, America spends more money per capita than any other nation in regards to the education of their children, yet their performance scores remain average. Given that fact, federal funding for schools should not continue to increase without a concrete plan behind the money. Also, the government programs that claim to help pay for higher education need to be rethought so as to be more in favor of the needs of the student. Funding for schools comes from two main sources: state and local taxes and the federal government, which accounts for about 10% of the funding. A problem with the bulk of school funding coming from taxes is that the money per year is not consistent, but fluctuates according with the strength of the economy. Some districts choose to supplement this funding with corporate aid, either allowing businesses to advertise on school grounds or allowing exclusive product placement in cafeterias and vending machines. Critics of corporate aid claim that corporations could impose their own agendas onto the schools, such as an oil company supporting a science program that diminishes the effect of impact of fossil fuels on the environment. Although this scenario is always a possibility, it is not a very realistic or strong argument against corporate aid. While the increasing levels of debt have had politicians endorsing cutting the educational budget, spending on education has actually increased over the years instead of being reduced. However, many schools never actually benefit from the increased spending. For instance, the Department of Education is a federal organization that takes up funding for schools to pay for bureaucrats who are counterproductive to the overall education system. Schooling is supposed to be an issue for the state and local governments to be in charge of, so spending those tax dollars on an organization that should have nothing to do with education is wasteful. And it is the Department of Education that ends up creating federal stimulus or education that does not benefit the schools whatsoever. In 2001, the Department of Education enacted the No Child Left Behind program, the original function of which was supposed to provide extra educational resources or more school funding for children who perform poorly on standardized tests. What the NCLB actually did was create administrative positions related to following the federal standards, instead of hiring additional teachers or providing more resources to the schools. So what is the point of spending more money if it does not benefit the schools? There was no need to create those administrative positions when the standards are not supposed to be set by the government, but by the states themselves. One of the main claims of the current public education system is that despite massive federal spending on education, public schools are doing a progressively worse job of educating the students. However, these critics fail to take into account the fact that most of the spending goes towards administrative costs. If the federal and state governments reduce the amount of policies and restrictions that school districts are forced to comply with, then more money could go towards hiring more teachers and providing better resources, which are tools that directly impact student performance. According to Lynn Varner, an editorial columnist for the Seattle Times, spending money as fast as it can be printed is short-sighted and meaningless without long-term improvements and accountability goals firmly attached. Varner asserts that more stimulus funds towards education is counterproductive without adding streamlining and reform to how the money is spent. The argument is not being made that public schools do not have needs that should be addressed, but with the money already not being put to good use in public education, the last thing that is needed is more stimulus money thrown at education with no clear plan or purpose behind it. There is no reason to add to the debt faced by the nation when the benefits of such spending is unclear. Instead, the government needs to put a lid on federal spending for education purposes until it can organize how it is spent. Varner states that a compelling case for deficit spending, as argued by National Economic Council Director Lawrence H. Summers, is that such spending spurs the economy and produces maximum bang for the buck. If the case Congress makes for increased spending on education was examined with the same lens, then their argument would fall apart. The only argument that proponents of increased stimulus money for education can claim is that it will save teaching jobs. But Varner questions whether all those jobs need to be saved. In her opinion, a smart federal rescue would not just save jobs, but would save the jobs of the best teachers in the system. Layoffs would be based solely on an educator's performance and evaluation as opposed to seniority. Also, Varner points out that stimulus money would be distributed to states based on population, not on expected layoffs. So states who were not expecting to let go of any teachers would still receive money. That excess money could be spent on other things, with no stipulations that the schools themselves benefit from the spending. The school districts could spend money on resources that would not even benefit the students or increase their performance. An example of this is giving stimulus money to the teachers' unions to pacify them and ensure their cooperation, instead of improving this public school system like parents have been calling for. Varner wants to see more money going to schools just as much as anybody, but argues that the United States cannot afford to spend money that does not further education reform. Stimulus money without a clear plan is just a waste of the taxpayers' money. And with the ever-increasing inequality between incomes, politicians will start to place even more emphasis on public education as the solution, so having a plan that spends stimulus money wisely and reforms the education system is crucial. It is important to look past the political hype in terms of education spending and look at the plan itself and whether it has viable long-term effects. Lindsay Burke is a Will Skillman Fellow in Education at the Heritage Foundation. Her view on education spending is a bit more radical, arguing that no more federal money should be spent on education and that national lawmakers should end federal education programs. Burke asserts that the state and local governments should take responsibility for education spending and get rid of the bureaucrats by eliminating certain non-teaching staff. She claims that it is possible to cut expenses in that realm without sacrificing education quality. Burke begins her argument by talking about the proposed federal increase in education spending in the amount of $25 million. The Obama administration tried to make the argument that if the amount of money spent on education was not increased, then the nation's public schools would face reductions in teaching staff and loss of education programs. However, according to Burke, the number of non-teaching staff or administrative positions have increased by 138% in the past several decades. Teachers now make up barely half of all public education employees. The fact that teachers make up half of public school employees means that most of the other half are administrative positions. Employees in administrative positions make more money than teachers do, so all that money is being wasted on bureaucracies and unnecessary positions when it could be going towards hiring more teachers and getting better resources. Burke clearly states her plans and suggestions for reform, making plain both the reform needed and an explanation for why her reform should happen and benefits of the reform. Throughout her viewpoint essay, she makes known the problems faced by our education system and then offers solutions to fixing these problems. Burke's main issue that she feels needs to be addressed is that the government should not have a foothold in public education. Quoting as such, "Funding education is a state and local government responsibility. Continuing to increase federal funding ensures that Washington intervention into education will continue to grow at the expense of parents, taxpayers, and local school leaders. Rather than spend $25 billion in taxpayer money through yet another federal education program, the federal government should empower states with more flexibility and control over how existing federal education dollars should be spent." Burke's basic plan involves getting most of the power of choice back to the state and local governments. She wants the government to allow states to opt out of the federal K-12 programs and direct funding to the education programs of their choice. This gives states greater flexibility and control over their education money and eliminates any costs with having to keep up with the requirements of the federal programs. Likewise, Burke wants the federal programs to be simplified and increase the flexibility of the use of their funding. States should be allowed to make federal Title I tax dollars portable if they choose. Burke also feels that states should reduce the number of administrative positions in public schools, refrain from making staffing decisions based on seniority, and make decisions based on the effectiveness and competence of the teacher. If teaching and administrative positions were based on competence instead of seniority, the quality of public education would increase significantly. Teachers would receive pay raises based on their impact on student performance, as opposed to across-the-board pay raises. Keeping teachers in a position when they are not effective simply because they have been teaching for a long time is one of the reasons why public education appears to be failing its students. Public education at the lower levels is not the only institution that fails our students. Federal spending on education needs to be addressed when in relation to higher education concerns as well. Now, most colleges are self-sufficient, using tuition money to run their campuses, but there are government programs in place that are supposed to help students pay for college. Many students choose not to attend a higher education institution due to lack of finances. According to writer Ann Austin, college should be viewed as an investment into the future, stating that college graduates earn 77% more than those with a high school diploma. The way Ann explains it makes it seem like a student cannot afford not to attend college. She goes on to say that, as by Peterson's Guide to College, degrees from colleges can be anywhere from $30,000 to $50,000 at state universities and twice that at $100,000 from private colleges. But students should not shy away from college as there is plenty of financial aid provided by the federal government, colleges, and other private sources. Austin asserts that, as per a study from the College Board, the government gave away $30 billion of financial aid to 7 million students. Colleges themselves distributed $8 billion, and the private sources collectively contributed $30 billion. The issue with Austin's assertion is that it can no longer be viewed as relevant. This study from the College Board was conducted in 2001, and it is now 2016. The cost of college is realistically higher now, with no evidence of an increase in financial aid. Additionally, this source was written in 2003 and is one of the most recent studies that deals with the whole topic of financial aid, and not just one program. Since 2003, no other relevant studies have been recorded into any database. A more positive aspect of this viewpoint by Austin is how informative it is for students with questions about financial aid. She breaks down the entire process for financial aid and explains the different types of financial aid and scholarships, loans, grants, and work-study programs. The first step Austin suggests is finding out the cost of attendance, or the total cost of going to college for a 4-year degree, and subtracting that from what is known as the expected family contribution, or the EFC. One government program mentioned by Austin is the free application for federal student aid, otherwise known as FAFSA. This government program takes what students would ordinarily have to pay out of pocket and puts together a combination of scholarships, grants, loans, and work-study opportunities to help the student pay for college. A flaw in determining financial aid is that it is assumed that the parents will be contributing, which is not always the case. Some students will not qualify for as much financial aid due to the incomes of their parents, when in reality they will not be receiving any money from their parents to help pay for college. Another form of financial aid is a kind of loan forgiveness, a scholarship program offered by state and federal government agencies. How it works is the student pays for college up front in the loans, and then they work for a government agency for several years, and that agency pays off their loans. Some examples of federal agencies that participate in this loan forgiveness program are AmeriCorps, Learn and Serve America, National Service Scholarship Program, and Senior Corps. While this program is a useful opportunity for students to pay for college, there are some issues with this. This program is not available to all students, typically only those in underrepresented fields such as teaching and healthcare. The other problem is that the student has to work for several years for their agency or their loans will not be paid, and there is no guarantee of a job when the student is finished working for the agency. A way to rectify these issues would be to have these agencies partner with businesses or firms so that the student can be doing work semi-related to their degree, and then also have some job opportunities waiting at the end. And then the business, and the more businesses and fields that the agencies partner with, then the more students they could offer the loan forgiveness program to. Ann Austin is not the only one doing research into programs to help students pay for college. Professor of Law Elizabeth Warren, Professor of Economics Sandy Baum, and law student Ganesh Sitaraman worked together to discuss the problems college students face when it comes to paying for college. And their solution is a loan forgiveness program known as Service Pays. Warren and her colleagues asserted that 97% of Americans see a college degree as the single most important factor for a young person to be successful. It is their ticket to securing a place in the middle class. But the cost of college is becoming too much for families to bear alone, so the students are having to take out loans and graduating deep in debt. Getting a degree and a higher earning potential because of that degree is nullified by the high risk associated with the high amounts of debt they have accumulated. To help students who want to work hard to be able to pay for college, Warren, Baum, and Sitaraman created the proposal of the Service Pays program. The whole idea of the Service Pays program is like the loan forgiveness programs that Ann Austin was describing, but available to all college graduates with more options to choose from when doing community service. Minus the cost of inflation rates, over the past 15 years, the cost of in-state tuition at an average state university has doubled. This calculation does not include extraneous costs such as textbooks and the basic cost of living. Grants and scholarships used to be only for the poorest students, but now more than 2/3 of full-time undergraduates utilize them. Even with most students receiving some form of financial aid, it is not enough to close the increasing distance between cost of college and the family's ability to pay. While college prices continue to grow, the financial aid only grows at about half of the former rate, which causes students to have to take out loans to pay, and as a result, about 60 to 75% have to take on debt to pay for college. About 30% of that 75% have debt burdens so large that they cannot manage them. Those students who then move on to jobs in public service and other low-paying careers, or whose degree did not get them as many opportunities as they had hoped, begin their adult life with debts that create a financial hole nearly impossible to overcome. With this problem in mind, the Service Pays program steps in. The program would be accessible to all students, whether they graduated from a 2- or 4-year university, no matter if it was a public or private one. The program would require the government to increase the amount of money that students could take out in loans from the Stafford Loan Program, which would offer the same rates as current student loans. Then, after graduation, 1 year of work for some type of community service program would forgive 1 year of student loan debt. Any student, despite their family income, could borrow the money, but would have to repay it through community service or pay the loans back normally. According to the article by Baum, Warren, and Sitaraman, with Service Pays, typical students would begin adult life debt-free at 26 with a college diploma and 4 years of work experience. Students could buy their own tickets to the middle class. Service Pays would have several different avenues for students to choose from when doing their community service. They would be assigned to the state-provided work programs to work in public schools, community upkeep and repair, work with public services such as law enforcement or firefighters, and help organize communities and build the economy. The Service Pays program also wants to work with international services like the Peace Corps, Foreign Service, and AmeriCorps to allow students to qualify for loan forgiveness who would choose to engage in international community service. Some issues with this program are that it relies on jobs being created by the government, both state and federal, and by programs already in existence like the Peace Corps and Foreign Service. Another issue with Service Pays is that the dollar amounts of the available loans would be based on public 4-year colleges and universities. So those in private colleges or more expensive public universities would have to take out more loans and would still only have 4 years' worth of loans paid off at the end of the community service, leaving them with the debt after their community service was over. Service Pays is also expensive. They were estimating that if 10% of graduates participated in this program, the cost to forgive their loans would total to $3 billion. An additional cost of this program would fall to the state and local governments, who would be responsible for creating the public service jobs and providing housing for the college graduates. Unfortunately, because opportunities like the Service Pays program do not exist for students today, the problems faced by the students continue to overwhelm them. Federal funding for schools should not continue to increase without a concrete plan behind the money, and the power of spending that money should be in the hands of the state and local governments. Also, the government programs that claim to help pay for higher education need to be rethought so as to be more in favor of the needs of the student. Focusing education spending on reform and not just throwing money at a program to try and make it go away is more important to not add to the federal deficit and to properly enact a change in our school system that will have a positive effect for the students of all ages far into the future.